Thanks, Connor, and thank you all for joining us today for User First SEO, a non-contentious guide to building pages users will find and love. It looks like plenty of you have noticed that there's a poll running. While we're introducing ourselves, we'd love to get your input on that. Oh, it's been closed, never mind. I'm Marlena Baker. I'm a software engineer at Quizlet and actually just passed 1 year at the company, which is super exciting. I'm passionate about accessible, equitable, and quality education. On the side, I co-organize the Denver Vue.js meetup, and I'm a member of Develop Denver's education and content team. And I'm super thrilled to be able to present to you today with.
Hi, I'm Annie Wolff. I'm also a web developer at Quizlet, and I am a recent convert to the awesome nerdiness of technical SEO. And I do a little bit of volunteering myself. I work with an organization called STEM Blazers, which exposes middle and high school girls to careers in STEM. And also I serve as a mentor and on the mentor committee at Turing School. Great, so let's jump in. Today we are going to case of why you should care about SEO. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the ways that you can make your pages great for SEO by making them usable and accessible to all, being confident in the technologies that you're choosing, and then also being conscious of your performance of your pages and delivering them very quickly. And then finally, we'll take a step back to look at the site level SEO, and then we'll sum it all up and leave you with a few takeaways. So first, why should you worry about the SEO of your site? So this is Denver's Startup Week, right? And growth is a really critical part of any startup's story. And one way to grow, especially at a high volume and quickly, is through organic search. So many people find the products that they use on search results. And you may have the most amazing content that is incredibly relevant to millions of searchers, but if Google can't find it or understand it, then users won't be able to either. So let's look a little bit at our poll results here. These are really, really interesting. We have a slightly heavier split towards people who have worked on SEO before. I wonder if some of those are our teammates here at Quizlet. But a few of you are new to this, so that's great. We're going to be talking to you too. Also, a heavier weighting towards the fact that it would be somewhat hard to improve the SEO of a page. A little bit on very hard and neither hard nor easy. And nobody said it would be easy or somewhat easy. So we're going to make a case that it's really not too far different from what you're already doing. Marlena is going to speak to that.
Yeah, so let's jump in with building your pages. To give you a little foundation, I'm going to explain how Googlebot explores the web. And it all starts when your page's URL gets put into Googlebot's crawl queue. Eventually, the URL will be passed to Googlebot's crawler. And that crawler will look at your plain HTML and pick out all of the links that it's allowed to follow and drop those right back into the crawl queue. And so that's the cycle of crawling that lets it explore the internet, and why linking is really important. So much more on that later. Simultaneously, it's going to pass the URL to a render queue to eventually be rendered by a headless Chromium instance. Now that is where the rendered HTML is processed for the content of your page, and hopefully that content is desirable to Google and you are indexed. What we're all here to learn how to do. So helping Googlebot understand your page is really helping programs understand your page. And Googlebot's not the only program that might come along and consume your page. The other really big one is going to be screen readers. So by making a page that is program readable for Googlebot, you are also making a page that is program readable for screen readers and people who need those assistive technologies, and vice versa. So 2 birds, 1 stone. One of the best ways to make that program readable page is through semantic HTML. We all love a good div, and it provides real quick, easy structure to our page. You know, throwing some text in the span is something we've all been known to do. We can always style it in CSS. But divs and spans have no meaning, whereas there's this rich set of semantic HTML elements that do have meaning. So you might have divs inside of divs with a span for your navigation links. It would be much more useful to have that be a header with a nav and A links, proper A links for your navigation. More on linking later, I promise. Your main content can live in an actual main tag. And I can't overstress the importance of having your headings be proper headings, not just styled, and showing the proper architecture of the page. One of the most important ones as far as improving your SEO, as well as providing the appropriate content to users, is A tags. A tags with a proper href, and most importantly, maybe not most importantly, the href is pretty important, but just as importantly, having text inside of your links. So we have these cards on Quizlet that link to other sets, and they weren't doing that. And the SEO team discovered that and was able to correct it, thus giving Google and users a better view into the sets available. Another key element of having an easy to consume page is making sure that the main content that users are actually there for is easy to access. Pop-up advertisements, personal bane of my existence. Interstitials that block the main content and make it harder to consume are going to be detrimental. Not to say you can't have advertising on your page, but you need to make sure that it is there supporting the content and not completely obscuring it. Now, one of the best ways to take a look at your best practices is through a validation service like W3C's markup validation. I've kind of unfairly dropped Amazon into the hot seat here. It lets us see that there are lots of little issues and the detail that the validator provides. So quick, easy check with actionable results. Another great one is Google Chrome's Lighthouse audit tool. It has both a best practice audit and an SEO audit. It will go through your page, desktop or mobile, and provide you those results. As you can see, we're doing quite good on best practices. We have one link that needs some attention, or we need to mark it as not important to Google for SEO. But again, you get some results that you can really take action from.
Great. Yeah. So you know that the content and the setup of your pages is great for SEO. So now as a developer, you need to build them. And it's really important to choose the right technologies and understand how they work with SEO. Okay, let's address it head on, the big JS question. So before I joined the Quizlet SEO team, the only thing that I knew about SEO, or only thing I had heard, was that single page application frameworks like React or Vue or Angular were anathema to SEO, that anything that depended on them to be rendered would never be shown to Googlebot and so could never be shown in search results. Google has been doing this search game for about 30 years and the web has changed a lot. in that time period. And Google's main goal is to find the best, most relevant content for searchers. And they recognize that a lot of that content relies on SPAs, or single page applications, to be rendered. And so in the last few years, they've invested really heavily in improving the way that they can evaluate, render, and index single page applications and JavaScript in general. So they now rely on their web crawler, web rendering service now uses an evergreen Chromium browser, which means that it has all the latest features. No longer will it be an old version, 20 years or 20 versions back. And so now you can know that it has access to the most modern web technologies and be sure that it's going to work. Okay, so Google's guidance is that now it can see content that is rendered by JavaScript. There are a few best practices that it throws out there that are important to follow and know about, but I want to have a big caveat on this. Although Google's guidance is JavaScript is great, SEOs in the wild have seen that it's not always consistent when Google chooses to fully render a JavaScript reliant page. And so because of that, it's always safest to pair your single page applications with a server-side rendering tool. So what these tools like Next.js or Gatsby provide is the ability to return fully rendered HTML from the initial server response. This is great for users as well because they see the content of the page much faster. They don't have to wait for large JavaScript bundles to be downloaded and evaluated and then rendered. So these do have user benefits as well. You might not recognize this last icon on the slide. This is XHP, the icon for XHP, which is the PHP templating language that Quizlet uses for some of our server-side rendered pages. So we continue to support for our most critical SEO pages, both server rendered and client rendered versions. So maybe a server-side or an SSR rendering tool is going to be your long-term goal, but it can be a really big investment. So what can you do in the short term to see if there are any problems with your JavaScript or with rendering on your page in general? I want to connect this to the standard QA process that most product teams go through. You may spend a few weeks or potentially a quarter or two building a new feature. And if most of your users are coming to your website on IE 11, you're going to want to test in that browser. Maybe that's not what your developers use, but you're definitely going to want to run your tests to be sure that all of the beautiful CSS that you've worked on will render for everyone. So being sure that things are rendering for Googlebot can follow the same process. Googlebot provides a lot of tools and information on how your pages are being rendered. I'll touch on a few of those in just a moment. And you can build in the SEO testing into your standard QA flow. Another big change that's happened in the last few years that Google as a company has tried to address is the increase in mobile users. So it's really common nowadays for the majority of users of a given site to come on mobile devices. And Google recognizes this and they have moved to a mobile first index. So this means that they primarily use the mobile version of most sites to index and rank your content. So this is great. Hopefully, some design teams have already adopted mobile first design. Hopefully you're already testing on many devices during your QA process. And you can be sure that your pages are working really well on mobile. A few caveats or a few points that I want to point out. You want to make sure that there's parity between the desktop version and the mobile version of your site. If you have content that you remove from the mobile version of your site, maybe for usability, it's not going to be indexed. And so you won't be able to rank for those, for maybe keywords that appear in that content. So maybe you can always collapse menus and make sure the page is usable for mobile users, but has that rich content that Googlebot loves to see. So the first tool I want to point you towards is for mobile users. It's called the Mobile Friendliness Tool, and it's a free tool provided by Google. And you can input any URL into it and get a test that's rendering in the same way that Googlebot would render. And so you can see, are there any issues with the JavaScript? This page does have a large amount of JavaScript on it. Is there any issues with the rendering? It gives you the rendered HTML. So if maybe there's a particular component that you're worried about not rendering, you can search that HTML to see whether it is appearing. You can see the screenshot. Also, it provides some details on whether there are any issues loading content. You see, we have a little warning sign, but all of the bundles that failed to load were analytics. So those aren't bundles or things that we want Google to crawl anyway. So we're not too worried about those. The next tool is one of my favorites. It's really a collection of tools called Google Search Console. If you are the owner of your site, or if you have control of the code, then you can verify yourself to Google as the owner and get access to this UI, Google Search Console. It has tons of ways and tools for understanding the search performance of your site. And I'm only going to touch on a few of them here, but know that it has a lot of ways to diagnose and observe what's happening in search for you. The one that I want to point you towards for rendering testing is the URL inspection tool. So again, similar to the mobile friendliness tool, you can input a URL and it will actually search the Google index itself and bring back a lot of information, including when was this page last crawled? What device was it crawled with? Were there any issues during the crawl? Was anything failed to render? Was the page indexed? You can see the cached HTML again and see what is actually cached in the index and search it for any issues. It has so much information, and I know I rely on it in my everyday pretty heavily.
So you've chosen the technology that you're going to move forward with as you improve your SEO. Another key component is delivering those pages. Google cares about performance. Speed was added as a ranking factor for desktop searches in 2010. And then in 2018, it was added to mobile ranking criteria. Now, it's not the only or a heavily weighted one, but having poor performance is a sure way to shoot yourself in the foot as you're trying to improve your SEO. So Google has recently given us the Core Web Vitals as indicator of what they care about on the web and what they think we should care about as far as web performance. So this is 3 high-level metrics that are meant to be broadly applicable. And we're going to talk through what they are right now, but know that these are, just like the web, going to change. So it's something that you need to be proactive about. The first core vital we're going to talk about is largest contentful paint. So this is the largest piece of content that your page renders. So we've got a mobile page rendering here, and it might render this text, and that's going to be your first contentful paint, and for the moment, the largest. But by the time the page is fully loaded, you've actually loaded these much larger images, so these are now your largest contentful paint. It's important to pay attention to this because having large elements on your page can really slow down your performance, and knowing what the max is will help you decrease the whole. The next is first input delay. I'm going to try not to get too into the weeds on this one, but when users interact with your page while it's still loading, they can see a delay because your page is still busy rendering. The browser can only do so much at once. So here we're loading our page again. Some of the content loads, this read more link loads, and the user has had enough time to browse your little snippet and wants to read more. So they click on it. But your page is loading these large images, and it's busy doing that, so it can't respond to that read more. And only after everything has loaded that it expands out and lets the user see the rest of the content. This provides a really slow perceived experience on your page and can frustrate users. The last is cumulative layout shift. My biggest pet peeve by far. So this is when the loading of elements onto your page moves other content around. So say we have this confirmation screen with a yes button and a no button. The user wants to click no, but you have this flashy image that you've decided to have on the page. It's larger, it loads after the rest of the content, shifting the buttons down and accidentally making them click on yes. Now they see this very cheerful confirmation screen, but they're not feeling all that cheerful themselves. This is perhaps a little contrived, but the shifting of elements can definitely lead to a lot of user frustration as they try to start browsing your page mid-load. So coming back around to Lighthouse Audit, there's also a performance audit available. So this will give you a score, much like the others, as well as letting you know where you came in on cumulative layout shift and first input delay and largest contentful paint, along with other metrics. There's a lot of performance metrics to look at. It'll also give you ideas of how you might improve those metrics. The nice thing about the Core Vitals is that there's a lot that can move the needle, so you can take small incremental steps to better performance. And you can get a very similar report through the Page Speed Insights, also provided by Google, where as you can see, it's showing you first contentful paint, first input delay, and all the rest. But nothing beats real user metrics, or RUM. Probably not the drink, depending on how bad they turn out. But usually when performance people are talking about RUM, they're talking about real user metrics. This is what users are actually experiencing as they load your page. And it's wildly important to know real people on real devices because you can only test so many devices. And synthetic tests will only give you so much accuracy. Knowing what's really happening out in the wild is key. So you can do that through your own logging or through a service. This is Datadog here.
Great. So we've built pages that are accessible and usable with technologies that we fully tested, and our pages are lightning fast. What's left? We are going to take a step back and think about our pages at the site level. So what is a site but a collection of pages? And it's really important to think about how you're organizing these pages and making it easy for both users and for search engine crawlers to navigate it quickly and find the most important and most relevant content. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about a SEO concept called internal linking. Marlena really did a really great job breaking down the crawl, render, index cycle that Googlebot goes through and pointing out the importance of links. The first step that Googlebot does when it reaches a page is it searches it for links to follow. So say our friendly little Googlebot here comes to our first page, the page titled internal linking, I guess. It finds links to 3 more pages. It will add each of those pages to the crawl queue, and it will move on to each of those pages. On the 3rd page or the bottom one, it finds another link and it continues through your site, so on. What would happen though if you had a page that had no links going to it? We call these orphan pages. And if a page has no internal or external links, an internal link is a link from your domain to another page on your same domain. And an external is what it sounds like, from another domain into your domain. If a page has neither of those, nary a one, it will never be crawled by Googlebot. Additionally, it's probably going to be really hard for users to find. Unless they have the URL and know that this is what they want, they're probably not going to get to it either. So it's really important to think critically about what links you're including on your pages and how many links you provide and where those appear. So I'm going to break down a few tools that you can use on your site to improve your internal linking or expose your site structure. The first one is going to be really common to most users of the web. It's global navigation. Most websites have a header and many have footers. And you can use links in both of these places to surface the most important or maybe the most helpful pages to users. So you can see this is a Quizlet example. This is our home page. And we have a few links that are really great for users like search and create, but we also have some links that have dual purpose that are helpful to both users and to Googlebot. I've pointed them out here. This browse button expands a menu that includes links to our subject pages. I'll explain a little bit more about why those exist in a next slide, but we just know that they are pages that we want Googlebot to see, and we want them to be crawled by Googlebot. We've doubled down on this in the footer by providing more links. So Google uses the number and location and prominence of links to a given page, say arts and humanities in this case. This page is linked to very frequently on our site, and so Google sees that and recognizes that it's a page with higher authority or potentially higher importance on the site. So that's one way that you can say, hey, Google, or hey, users, these are the most important links. Pretty much a no-brainer if you've ever built a global nav. Next topic I want to touch on is information architecture. So information architecture, to define it, is just the organization of pages on your site and how that organization is exposed through linking. So there are a lot of ways to go about building your information architecture. Links in the footer are one way to start, or in the header, but you can also leverage a few other tools. In this screenshot, I have included breadcrumbs. I, as a user, love breadcrumbs. Usually I'll land on a page and maybe it's on an e-commerce site and it's not quite the product that I want, but I know that I want something similar to this. I can use the breadcrumbs to navigate quickly to other products in the same category. So we have something really similar here. Maybe the student wants to study US state capitals, but isn't finding what they need in this set. They can step up one, or maybe they don't want to study the US, they want to study world geography. They can go straight there. Googlebot can do the same thing. It sees these links and understands this page relates to the other pages linked on the Geography of North America page. It can infer information architecture just by where breadcrumbs are appearing on your site. Breadcrumbs also have some other benefits. You can see they can appear in SERPs. So SERP is a search engine result page, and they're kind of what SEOs of all stripes have their eye on. We want to appear high, hopefully #1 on a SERP. And you want to have a really appealing SERP result, which I think this one is for Quizlet. We can show users that the content or the relevance of this page that we're linking to, that it relates to Geography of North America. Also, you can notice it has a very high rating. So that's another way to improve your SERP. So breadcrumbs are a really powerful tool. Another way that you can expose or build information architecture is through topic pages or topic clusters. And you can see on the right, I have an example of a key phrase page, as we call them. It is linked to actually from the US state capitals page, and also provides a link to this set and to a bunch of other sets or pages that are relevant to capitals. So this is a great tool for users. Again, they can navigate quickly and browse the many options that we have. And also it's a great tool for Googlebot to not only find all of these sets and crawl them, but also to visit other pages like the Greek page that we have linked to up here, or the Middle East page, and Googlebot will crawl those and then crawl all of the pages linked to them from there. So it's really important to think critically about how your pages relate to each other and how they can be linked to. This might not be as big an undertaking if you only have, say, 50 pages on your site, or even maybe 100 or 500. But on a site like Quizlet, where we have potentially hundreds of millions of user-generated content, it becomes a big undertaking and something that we work on quite a bit on the SEO pod. There are a few Google-specific tools that you can use to expose links to be crawled. The only one I'm going to touch on here is XML Sitemaps. XML is a markup language that just provides a way of organizing data. And in this case, the data is links. So say maybe we just built our key phrase pages and we want Google to know about them and to find them. We could publish an XML sitemap that has a long list of all of those pages. XML sitemaps usually signal to Google, hey, we have some cool content we think you might like, and they can provide a boost of initial crawl and discovery, which is awesome. The other benefit of XML sitemaps is that they are an observability tool. They, as you can see here, this is a screenshot from Google Search Console again. If you publish a sitemap, then you can actually dig into the sitemap itself and see how each URL is performing. So this example sitemap has a little over 2,000 links in it. And you can see most of them were crawled and considered valid, green, go. And that's a really great sign. Also, we had no errors. We had no warnings, which is awesome. But if we did, we could click into those and see which URLs had the errors. Interestingly, almost 300 of these URLs were excluded, which means that they were crawled, and Google said, we don't need that content in the index. So you can start to diagnose, why did Googlebot find this and decide that it wasn't interesting or wasn't worth indexing? What content was in it? How could we improve that content? Maybe it's duplicate and we should remove it from the site, maybe orphan the page or remove it from the sitemap. You can really start to diagnose any internal linking problems or page level problems that you have. All right, tools. So your friend and mine, Google Search Console again. Internal linking can be kind of a challenging thing to get a full picture of. Again, if you have a smaller site, maybe it's a little easier. If you have 50 pages, you can know clearly where each page is being linked to. If you have 300 million or so, it's hard to hold all of that in your head. So Google Search Console does provide some linking tools, which is great. You can see in this example that it provides information on external links, which are another way to pass authority to a page on your site, but it can be a little harder to control because they appear on other people's pages. And then also it provides the top linked pages, which is great. With Google, usually the UI is limited to about 1,000 rows. So if you have a large site, it can be of limited use. But we've actually seen changes as we've published new page types and started to link to them. We've seen those pages float to the top, which is really encouraging and shows that our internal linking strategies are working, which is great. Because internal linking is kind of a large, complex problem to be solved, there are a lot of third-party tools as well that you can invest in. So if your team thinks that you want to do a really big deep dive on internal linking, get a good grasp of what the status is and how to improve it, you can look into those third-party tools. Yeah. Great. Okay. We've covered a lot of content. Let's sum it up and leave you with a few takeaways.
So first of all, if you build with users in mind, you'll prime yourself for great SEO results. Building a great page great pages are something that Google wants to show to users.
Also, you have a lot of control over what technologies you choose. You can also test them thoroughly to ensure that you're building pages that are crawlable and usable by users, and test them thoroughly.
If you deliver your site quickly, you'll avoid getting dinged by Google, and you will make your users even happier to have their content at their fingertips as fast as possible.
And finally, think about how you're organizing your content. Expose the most important links and pages very prominently, and build an internal linking structure that makes sense and is usable by Google and by users.
And when you put it all together, you have a site that users will find and love. We've linked some further resources if you'd like to dig into some of these topics. Don't rush to screen cap. We do have the slides available online for anyone to take a look at. And now I think it's time for some Q&A.
Looks like our teammate Jeff has been in the Q&A channel answering questions. Thank you, Jeff. Good job.
Yeah. You know, Annie, until we have a question, I thought one interesting topic might be, so as you mentioned, the importance of internal linking, getting Google to the right content, a lot of work that we do at Quizlet. How do you tell how Google is getting to a page from some other page? That's been a fun project we've been working on. Maybe that would be a fun thing to share some details about.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. This is sort of an epic adventure that we've been going on. It can sometimes be challenging to know how Google is finding content on your site, like Jeff referenced. And it's really easy if you have good access to your access logs to see, okay, Googlebot uses a set number of user agents, which is just a string or a character value that it includes in its requests that identify it as Googlebot. So you can really dig into your access logs, but it could be hard to say, okay, Google crawled this page. Where did it find that page? We've gone through a few iterations of appending URL parameters to maybe track and see if we can associate impressions to page views. We're thinking about different schemas that we can use in the URL. We're thinking about ways to associate those access logs, maybe by time. It can be a whole discipline unto itself. So yeah, great question, Jeff.
Yeah, Dana White, AMP for SEO. That's a deep one. What do you think?
Oh man, AMP. This has been a bit of a hobby horse of mine too. Marlena, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on this too. It can be, but I'll give a quick overview of what AMP is first. This touches actually really closely on Marlena's section of the presentation, where performance is really, really important. And Google has signaled that this is a ranking factor. And so AMP is a way to build your pages that uses basically the bare minimum elements that you can. No JavaScript, or very, very, very limited JavaScript, very limited CSS, just no cruft, just the stuff that you need. And Google, this is a technology that Google supports / builds. So it's kind of questionable about whether Google is boosting AMP pages to improve or to like spread its adoption. So it's a really interesting topic. And thanks, Dana, for asking about it. Marlena, do you have anything to add there or any thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the things about AMP is that like there's already the discussion of server side and client side, and the last thing you want is like a whole nother thing to keep track of. So I think if it's within your power to use something like next, which will take your React and render it as AMP. That's where that kind of investment might make sense. But it's definitely like something you're going to need to weigh with like, what all are you trying to maintain in this endeavor? I think building your existing site as mobile ready as possible is possibly even more important than having AMP specifically.
Very true.
Yeah, I like this, Patrick. Brian, thank you. From a UX design point of view, what should you think about when you're designing, building wireframes for mobile web or responsive?
Yeah, I think some really key things are making sure that what you're designing is going to be consumable and structured in a way that's useful to users as well as to Googlebot. Making sure that links are accessible will take you a long way. Making sure they all have text in them and not like just images or something like that, or icons without any text would definitely take a hit. The other thing would be that mobile to desktop parity that Annie mentioned. Be sure that your mobile designs give your users all the same content that they would get on the desktop. Did you want to add anything, Annie?
Just that cross-functional communication is a really powerful tool. So if you have developers on your team who know about SEO, or maybe you have an SEO, a search engine optimizer themselves, you can talk to them about your designs, get feedback early in the process and talk to them about, any problems they could see or anticipate. And that can be a really powerful way to build SEO into the process early.
Yeah, Nate, thank you. One thing we also learned at Quizlet, I think, was when you're designing on mobile, you have a very limited amount of space. So you can actually get away with hiding content that users may not initially see, but the search engine might see, which was part of a recent project. Nate asks, what does good planning and conversation look like for SEO development when you're building a new feature? What do you want to hear as an SEO developer? I think that's a great question. And maybe I would almost think about it like, what do you not want to hear as an SEO developer, as a more illustrative way of like beginning the conversation between product and engineering?
That's a good one.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone caught Dylan. Dylan is another Quizlet engineer. He gave a really great presentation the other day on Tuesday, I think, about growth engineering. And I think that I think about that mindset a lot, which is thinking cross-functionally, sort of like I just touched on, and bringing data and observability to mind when you're designing experiments. I never want to hear we're doing this way. We're not going to test this. It's just the way that it's going to be. I don't want to hear flexibility when it comes to planning or thinking through requirements. But also, I think that's fairly uncommon. So I haven't run into a lot of teams that shut down conversations. So that's pretty great. And thinking about bringing everyone's brains to the table when you're planning what you want to work on, having brainstorms that include as many people as possible, and people of different roles. Everybody's got their own perspective. I think that's a really great way to start planning what you want to work on on your SEO team.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, because 100% communication will solve a lot of your problems out the gate. Communicate early and often. But I think, not that I've experienced this, but something that does come up is like, we're an SEO team, what's the user impact of what we're doing? And I think I would see like a giant red flag come across my vision if someone was like, well, it's not going to help, or it's going to, we don't really care what the impact is to the users. Luckily, that's not something I have to deal with.
Very cool. Yeah, Dylan asks, what are you actually putting into the sitemap? And Andy, I know you mentioned we have hundreds of millions of pages, and can we put them all in a sitemap, or multiple sitemaps, or a series of sitemaps? What gives?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do at Quizlet have sitemaps of sitemaps. There's a general consensus that smaller sitemaps are more easily crawled, which I think makes some really interesting writing out there about dynamic sitemaps. And I think there's previously sitemaps have been kind of static. They are generated once, you put them up and they got all your pages and you're done. But thinking about using this discovery aspect of a sitemap to publish a new version frequently, that will boost the amount of crawl that you can get, and also help your new pages to be crawled and receive traffic earlier. I think we lost Jeff.
I think you're right.
Great.
Oh dear.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered most of the questions. Just check the chat, make sure. Thanks still for that question about sitemaps. So thank you, I think, for well, thank you for your questions, and we could, yeah.